welcome back to another lesson and to a groove library lesson where we're going to look at a complete one-bar groove, 16th note groove, but more specifically a ghost note that comes right before a backbeat. And we've looked at various ghost notes on the site before, different patterns, doubles and singles, and particularly one that I've mentioned a lot, which comes after a backbeat. But then, of course, you can play one before, and it's something I struggle with a little bit, and I'm practicing often, particularly because I play traditional, and it's hard to get enough force sometimes to hit the backbeat and do things around just before or just after, because your hand is underneath the stick and you have to pull down. And because there's less force on top of the stick, to get a consistent rim shot sound perfectly every time is a little tricky with traditional, particularly when you have your right hand on top, as most right-handed drummers do. You can get a little tangled up, and it's something I'm working on. So it's a great thing to practice for your dynamics and your overall skill with dynamics between ghost notes and backbeats. It's also a nice groove on its own. So the whole groove is this. So that's the groove, and so we'll slow it right down, and there's a few variations that we'll get to. So let's take out a few things and just make a basic skeleton so we can concentrate on the left hand. So let's play this. So one upside we have is that dynamically the right hand is going to do the same as the left for that little tricky ghost note passage. The quiet note is with the quiet note of the left hand, and the loud right hand is with the loud of the left. It's just because the ghost note is right before, and we're trying to get a very quiet note, and it's before a loud note that really cuts the bar in half, the backbeat. You don't want the timing of the backbeat to be affected by that ghost note that comes before. We've also got a ghost note just after the first backbeat. So we've discussed that one before, but that's also tricky, and the timing can be a little off sometimes, because same reason, just reversed. So now let's try adding another bass drum in right after that second backbeat in the ghost note passage. So dynamically, something a little different, because we've got a fairly strong note with the bass drum with a quiet note with the hi-hat. But I like how those two bass drums are fairly close together around this little ghost note passage. So when you speed it up, so there's really a lot going on with the left hand, and it's just great practice for your timing and your dynamics. Another thing we can add is an open hi-hat to the beginning of the bar on the second bass drum. So now it's starting to come together with some other variations. Another variation we can add is a little diddle 30-second note drag at the end. So we normally have just a single ghost note happening with the last 16th note hi-hat of the bar. So we can just, instead of playing one note with the hi-hat, we play two little 30-second note. Perhaps not something to add every time, but it's something to practice and just another option to change things up so it doesn't sound too repetitive and you have some other variations to pull from. Another thing we can do is change the beginning bass drum pattern, allowing us some space to add some more ghost notes, another ghost note. So instead of, we can now do, so we're just shifting the bass drum over a little bit and adding in another ghost note. So now there really is a lot going on with the left hand. You really get that constant flow of ghost notes happening, especially as you speed it up. We can add the diddle to the end of that one as well. And then you can start adding open hi-hats in other places. Let's try that. We could try it at the beginning of the bar, the very first note. So now you have a bunch of different variations to work with, but really the lesson was about this one little ghost note pattern and how if you add that one ghost note just before the backbeat into your other ghost notes, it's very difficult and great practice for your dynamics and timing, but also it really starts to add a lot of flow. So now you have just more options for what you do with the ghost note. You put it just before the backbeat, just after the backbeat. You have your regular single note ghost notes in most of the gaps. When you can put a double in like we did with that second bass drum variation. And you put all of those together and it really starts to flow with the ghost notes. So then the goal is to, at various tempos, don't go too fast, always make sure the timing is nice and smooth. But for long periods of time, practicing these repetitive patterns and trying each variation.